We saw not just one, but two amazing female players play their last dances. We saw Feng and Wang Dongping reach a third consecutive final in 3 weeks, and we also saw the first French men's singles finalist in 79 years. Yes, it was another amazing week on the BWF World Tour. This week, the French Open Super 750 in Rennes. And as always, I'm here to talk about as much of the action as I possibly can in this week's episode of Beckman's Breakdown, the show where I take a look at all the BWF World Tour events from Super 500 up to Super 1000, including the majors and the team events. Like I said already, this week was the French Open Super 750, the third tournament in 4 tournaments we got in a row of Super 500 and above level. It is incredibly brutal. The schedule for this period is tough, and what hasn't made it much easier is that yet it was another week of rather slow action. I mean that in the fact that the hall played a little bit slow, the shuttles seemed a bit slow. Actually, I want to be a little bit more specific. When I first watched the opening rounds at this French Open, it seemed like the shuttles were playing a bit quicker. The conditions seemed a bit faster, and that was mainly because I think the arena is slightly smaller to what we're used to. But as the week got underway, as we got further and further into the tournaments, the shuttles seemed to slow down. I'm not sure whether the hall got slower or they were using slower shuttles. I probably would guess that it was the latter. Anyway, like I said, there's plenty to talk about, so I want to crack on. But before I do, and you know it's coming, the shameless plug for the Beckman's, Beckman's Breakdown merchandise. If you want any of this, it would support the channel and would also be a way for you to support me out there while you're playing or walking about. Then you can click the link in the description. There's still 20% off. I think there's 1 or 2 items left with that, but free worldwide shipping, and that will continue after the 20% discount is no longer there. So yes, with that out of the way, let's kick off episode 29, I believe it is. Can't believe I've quite done 29 episodes, but I want to kick off this episode with some, I guess you could call it rather sad news, because like I said, right at the top of this episode, we saw 2 female players do their last dance at the French Open. So yeah, that's where I want to start this episode. So the first player I want to talk about is Korea's Chae Jung. She announced her retirement on Instagram, and it was quite a surprise to everyone. I'm not sure many people, other than probably the coaches and her close friends, and obviously her badminton teammates, probably were aware that this was happening. I was certainly unaware and caught surprise. I think a few people sent it to me, her post on Instagram, via DMs, and I was a bit like, what's this? You know, I was a little bit surprised. I mean, she is 30 years old. I know that she's had injury issues. That's a big thing that has always got in the way of her career, always been a little bit of a stumbling block. You know, a lot of players are in that boat, but still, I thought with 30 years old, that's not too old. And also, it seemed like she just started a new, fresh and exciting partnership with the 19-year-old Lee Jong-min, a very talented young player. But alas, that is no longer going to be going on, that partnership, as Chae Jung, like I said, on Instagram announced that she would be retiring from the Korean national team. I don't know whether that means that she's going to continue playing on for clubs and internal stuff, because there's obviously a lot of competition and national competitions within Korea. So hopefully we'll still get to see her play a little bit, because she's still got plenty to give in the sport of badminton. She's still an incredibly exciting and interesting player to watch. So yeah, no, I kind of want to take this opportunity to obviously sing my praises of Chae Jung, because I've been an admirer of her badminton for a long time, and obviously highlight some of her top achievements, which there are numerous, but I've picked out 3 that I think are incredibly big and important. The first, I'll go not necessarily in order of importance, but you could possibly see it that way. The first one is she did win the China Open Super 1000. Her and Seung didn't win many big tournaments. We're talking like the Super 750s and Super 1000s, but they were able to win the China Open. That was in 2023, and that was following, I believe it was following, their World Championship win earlier in the year, where they won it in Copenhagen, where they did it by beating probably one of the best mixed doubles pairs in the history of the game, Zheng Siwei and Wang Yachong. And actually, before I talk about the third major achievement, leading on from talking about Zheng Siwei and Wang Yachong for a big period, especially from 2023 and into the Olympic year of 2024, they were Korea. This pair, Seung and Chae Jung, were the pair that were kind of the thorn in the side of Zheng Siwei and Wang Yichong. They were certainly the pair that I think had that pair and the Chinese coaches worried a little bit. I know when I spoke to Christian Luque, the physical coach for Zheng and Wang, that the Chinese coaches were a little worried when at the Asia Championships in 2024 in the semi-finals, Seung and Chae Jung defeated Zheng Siwei and Wang Yichong. That did send a few little ripples, a few little worries, because that was in the build-up towards the Paris Olympics. So yeah, Seung and Chae Jung, for that period, for that kind of year and a half, were definitely one of, if not one of the best pairs in mixed doubles. But obviously, even before then, they'd been a very successful pair from prior to Tokyo Olympics. So they've been around for a long time. They were one of the four pairs, or the top four pairs, when you had Zheng Siwei and Wang Yichong, Wang Dongping and Wang Lilu. You had Dichapon and Sapsari, and then you had Yuta Watanabe and Arisa Higashino. They were kind of top four, and then just outside that, you would have Seung and Cha Yu Jung. Quite good company to be in there. But going back to the three major achievements, the other one, which obviously a lot of people will always remember, is that Chae Jung won the deciding mixed doubles in the 2017 Sudirman Cup final when Korea beat China. Probably one of the biggest upsets, if one of the major upsets ever in the Sudirman Cup history, because Korea, I did a whole video on this, so I won't go into too much. I might link that in below, or I might put it up at the top of the screen up here, but it was an incredible win for the team that Korea had. No one expected them to win, and obviously with the team that China had. I know it was just after an Olympic Games when China were kind of in a transitional phase and could be seen as quite vulnerable, but even so, the team that Korea had, no one expected them to do well, especially not to win, and it was Chae Jung at that point partnering Choi So-gyu that won the deciding mixed doubles. It was an absolutely fantastic match, and probably a close even, I think, probably with the world title in 2023. But yes, an absolutely fantastic player, Chae Jung, left-handed, very skillful, very nimble, always active around the front court. Never someone that I felt would finish rallies a lot. I always felt that was maybe one of her slight weaknesses, the ability to kill and kind of finish shots. Definitely not on the same par as those four other pairs, the ladies from those pairs that I'd already mentioned. But what she did quite well was she was able to find gaps, and kind of like her speed and her agility around the front of the court was exceptional. And I think as Seung really grew into his mixed doubles role, when he started to take it more kind of like as his one discipline, they started to complement each other really, really well. So yeah, I want to wish Chae Jung nothing but the best. She had great success on the court, and I'm sure she will find it in her next chapter too. She will be sorely missed, but like I said, I hope she still plays in the Korean kind of leagues and the club systems. I watch a lot of that on YouTube, so I hope to see her still playing there. But we'll have to see on that one. If any of you know what her plans are after her international retirement, then let me know in the comments. So, moving on, Chae Jung wasn't the only player to announce her retirement. The other one that I've heard, and although I must admit, this one has only been through Badminton Talks IG, and they're pretty reputable, so I'm going to take this as fact, and that is Chen, the current Olympic champion in the women's doubles. One of the greatest female doubles players ever, definitely one of the most successful. She had majority of her success, which I'll get to in a second, in women's doubles, but she also had an incredibly successful mixed doubles career. It was very short-lived. She focused mainly in women's doubles pretty early on, but in those early years, in your 2015 to around 2017, 2018, her and Zheng Siwei, reached a world final in 2017, became world number ones, won the Super Series finals, won a whole load of Super Series tournaments. But I think it was around the end of 2017 where she truly focused solely on the women's doubles. Obviously, her and Jai Fan, who was her partner, which she achieved everything with, have come back for these last three tournaments, with the French Open being the final one, and they were able to reach, like they did in Denmark, they reached the semi-final with a pretty remarkable result, actually, especially, in all honesty, having watched them play. Chen, I think I said this last week, but definitely doesn't look as match fit or as sharp or as fit as she obviously as she was at the Olympics. That's understandable, but I think obviously since the Olympics she hasn't played as much badminton, especially at the highest level, as Jai Fan. Jai Fan's had a very successful kind of new partnership with Zhang Sushan, whereas Chen's partnered a couple of players, and their level has been more at the much lower Super 100s and Super 300 level, and even them not doing amazingly well in those tournaments. So Chen definitely didn't look too match fit, and I'd also say she definitely wasn't as competitive. I think one of the things that I remember Chen as, and what I think she'll be remembered for, is her like ungodly relentlessness. You know, she was always screaming and shouting and really giving it some, and one of the most competitive people I've ever seen on a badminton court. But watching her these last 2 weeks, whether it's because she knows her time is up or what, she's just trying to enjoy it, but she definitely wasn't as fiery and as energetic as she was. So that's why I felt it was actually quite surprising that they were actually able to still reach semi-finals. Obviously, they are a fantastic pair. They are obviously have great chemistry together, and they can obviously on their day more than capable. But I felt when I was watching them, especially the two pairs that beat them, so we had Kim and Kong last week, and this week is Li and Liu, the tactic was quite obvious, as to really kind of focus a lot of their attention on Chen. A lot of clears, a lot of drops, mover. She was getting tired or just wasn't able to kind of, like I said, play with enough intensity that was going to really break down the top pair's defenses. So that's why I was quite surprised that she was able to possibly beat pairs like Shida and Igarashi in Denmark, and Pearly Tan and Tina Muralithran this week in France, although maybe for the Malaysians, fatigue also, because they'd played all three tournaments, Arctic, Denmark and France. Maybe fatigue was a bit of a factor for them, but still, no, I was quite impressed that they were able to reach two semi-finals, and yeah, they admitted in an interview afterwards that whilst it wasn't, you know, an amazing result, they were obviously very pleased with the semi-final. It wasn't a win or anything. Their last dance, they didn't end it like, say, Zheng Siwen, Wang Yachong did last year at the World Tour Finals by winning their last tournament. They still felt it was a lovely ending, and they were just happy to enjoy their time on the court again. And in Jai Fan's words, in regards to their partnership, it was perfect playing with Chen. And yeah, they were, in a lot of regards, a perfect partnership, because they won so many titles together. Starting in the junior days, they won 2 World Junior titles. They reached 2 consecutive Asian Junior finals, winning one of them. They won 4 world titles as well, which is the most of any one pair. They reached 2 Olympic finals, winning the gold in Paris. Unfortunately, they did get the silver in Tokyo. They won 2 Asian Games titles, and they also won numerous world tour titles. I think it's 40 plus. So an absolutely incredible, badminton career resume there. There aren't many women's doubles pairs that can say that they've got the same. I don't think actually really there are any in terms of overall number of titles and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely amazing. So yeah, like I already said, Chen was a feisty player. She was I think she's got the nickname Dora after Dora the Explorer, mainly because of her, not so much her hairstyle now, but when she was younger, she always had this like bob hair, which looked like her. But yeah, like I said, she was relentless in her competitiveness and her desire to win. And so I'm sure she will take that attitude on to whatever is next. Although she did also admit in that interview with the BLF that she will now travel to tournaments to support Jai Fan. She's going to be the one in the crowd shouting, "Come on!" So, Jai Fan does intend to play on for much longer. So it'll be quite interesting to see if she actually does that, and we'll see her in the crowd. Maybe I'd like to see her, and we'll probably likely see her at the tournaments in China. But maybe we'll see her actually traveling around as Jai Fan's personal support group. Who knows? That could be quite fun. But yes. Happy retirement, Chen. Absolutely outstanding player, out of this world, and I wish you nothing but the success in whatever comes next for you. Moving on, sticking with Chinese players, obviously now we're switching to the mixed doubles, and I want to talk about Feng and Wang Dongping, because 3 consecutive tournaments they played in a row, and they reached 3 consecutive finals, and they've won the last 2. They won the 2 Super 750s, Denmark last week and France this week. That's a pretty outstanding achievement. I already spoke right in the introduction that the conditions on this European leg have been quite slow, which always makes things quite tough, much more brutal. You're going to get a lot more longer rallies. I think I saw, to quickly change it, in some of the men's doubles matches, a lot of 40-plus shot rallies, which you just never see. So that's kind of a testament and should give you a good idea of just how slow some of the conditions were. So the fact that, regardless of these slow conditions, they were able to reach 3 consecutive finals and win 2 of them, a lot of credit is credit when credit needs to be due. So yeah, no, and I think actually talking of the fatigue, I did see a little bit of that this week in France. They looked pretty tired in their semi-final win over Tang Chunman and Seung Sweat, but managed to dig deep. And then in their final earlier today, actually, because I'm recording this just after the finals were finished, against Dichapon and Subsara, they started rather slow. I think they went 8-2 down pretty quickly, and they were looking a little bit fatigued, a little bit tired, but they managed to get themselves back into it. And once they did, actually, I would say it was almost like their fatigue washed away. They looked more energetic. They more kind of energy inside them. They were, and I think one of the big things that was quite key in their win over the Thai pair was that they were stepping forward onto absolutely everything, especially in defence. And I think that's something in a lot of the doubles events, especially this week in France and last week as well. Pairs that were successful were the ones that were that little bit more looking to come onto the front foot when they defended, taking it to them. Because I think a lot of times it's quite hard to just directly attack through someone. Like I said, the shuttles were quite slow, the conditions quite slow. So to create maybe easy opportunities is to step in and really apply a lot of pressure. You might get something from that. And I think Feng and Wang did that pretty well. I'll be honest, I think Wang Dongping, once she came alive after that 8-2 down, she almost had boundless energy, like she hadn't played 3 weeks in a row. And actually, I think that it plays into her personality, because I know, again, I spoke to Christian Luque, and he said Wang Dongping's the kind of player that if she could play 10 hours every day. She just absolutely loves it. She's very competitive, just loves playing badminton. So I'm not surprised that she's part of a pair that have thrived or done so well off the back of consecutive weeks and consecutive tournaments. So yeah, it has been a brutal 3 weeks for them, but they've managed to come away with those 2 titles. Before I move on, I definitely want to talk about, I've spoken about this pair a few times, especially obviously been more focused on Feng Yanze. You know, when they first were a pair, they made a bit of a splash. Actually, I think it was at the Denmark Open like 4 years ago they reached a final. And obviously they've steadily become one of the top pairs in the world. They're currently world number 2s. But there was always that thing against Feng Yanze of how he can handle the big situations, the pressure matches. And over the last couple of years, especially relatively recently, like most notably even this year at the Sudirman Cup, where he proved a little bit that he can handle that he is starting to get a little bit this. And other areas that I think that he's improved upon since when I first saw him is his ability to find the gaps, do the little cross-court soft touches. I think he's also added to it from watching him over the last couple of weeks. He looks more stable. He's very, very tall. And I think, obviously, that has its advantages, but you can be twisted and turned. Your agility and mobility around the court can be exposed, and he's got far better at that. He's developed footworks and tactics where he doesn't lose his position. He does a lot of left leg lunging on his backhand so that he can maintain a kind of more open position, so he can kind of reach across and then use his height rather than step over and get twisted and turned. And I think he's definitely looking a lot stronger in his lower body and his core. He can maintain that really well, and he was doing a lot of those even in this final. Like he'd reach across push and then he can like lean across and whip it cross court. So he definitely looks a lot more stable. He did seem this week to be hitting it harder, definitely hitting more winners in this final than I've seen from him in a while. And like I said, I think on terms of defence, a lot more positive stepping forward. Now, I did speak about at the start of this little section on his improvements that I do feel he's got a little better at how he handles certain pressures, but there's still that doubt over this pair. They've just done 3 back-to-back finals, and I think this is actually their 9th final so far in 2025, and it's Feng Yanze's 11th, because he actually got to 2 finals with Wei Yaxin, the All England and the Swiss Open, because obviously China were playing around with the mixed pairs at the start of the year. But let's not forget the World Championships, where they were one of the favourites. They fell, I think, in the 2nd or 3rd round to Matthias Christiansen and Alexandre Boe. So you could still see that as there's question marks against them at the majors. You could probably put that over to the other Chinese pair as well. Obviously, Zhang Tingbang and Wei Yaxin lost to Christiansen and Boe actually here in France, but they'd reached the final of the previous 2 tournaments. So again, on the regular World Tour, China have got 2 pairs that are very, very consistent and can win the majority of the tournaments, if not pretty much all of them. But when it comes to majors, these pairs are struggling to win the golds, etc. So there's still that doubt, and I think heading into obviously next year when you've got another World Championships and I think Asian Games as well, be quite interesting to see how this pair do at those tournaments. So yeah, like I said, there's still doubts there at the biggest majors, but let's put that to the side for now. And just kind of appreciate the effort and congratulate Feng and Huang on what an incredible European tour they've had with 3 back-to-back finals and 2 titles out of those 3. Right, okay, so moving on, kind of completely change now. Obviously, I want to talk about Christo Popov because he almost had the perfect dream run. Christo Popov, if you're unaware, is a French men's singles player. He also plays men's doubles with his older brother Tomo Jr. Popov. But he had an absolutely incredible run, reaching the final of the men's singles. He was the first French men's singles finalist in 79 years. That is when we saw Henry Bilitza in 1946 win. He actually won the men's singles in 1946, and actually, funny enough, he won the men's doubles too. But unfortunately, Christo wasn't able to replicate what Henry did. He had to settle for silver. But I'll get to the final in a second. I kind of want to focus on a few other things too. First, like I said, Christo played brilliantly all week. And I think had a lot of questions about Christo Popov, naturally, for the Q&A section, asking me what's he improved upon, what makes him so good, etc. So I kind of want to go through some of the basic improvements or some of the observations I've had about Christo from watching him this week and actually watching him over the course of this year, because I think it's actually been this year where he's starting to get a bit more consistently getting into the quarterfinals, semi-finals and finals of a lot of the Super 500 and above tournaments. We're starting to see him in getting into the weekend matches far more often this year as opposed to last year. So for me, this week, let's just focus more on that. He played incredibly quickly, and especially in his quarterfinal and semi-final. So quarterfinal overall against Chi Yu-Jen, and then the first set in the semi-final against Kunlevitstan. He was so fast. He was like a bullet around the court. His attack and intensity was absolutely relentless. And also on top of that, he is incredibly quick on his feet. To do that, that means that he's also got a very fast defense. Kunlevitstan, for example, has a lot of deceptive skills. And you can see Christo going the wrong way, but he's so fast that he was still able to get the shuttle back and most of the time get it back with interest. I think in terms of improvements, I think he's definitely added some more layers to his attack. He's always been able to hit it quite hard. He's obviously fast, so he gets into the attacking situations quite a lot. But watching him before, it used to be a little bit one speed, all fast, all powerful, and would kind of win on intensity. And it kind of reminds me, but of a much higher level to how I played, also left-handed. But I knew as a player myself that if I wanted to get up to the higher levels, there's usually a ceiling where that reaches. You need to add layers to your attack. You need to play with variety, whether it's slicing or the occasional drop or the punch clears. So you keep your main weapon, your fast attack, open as an opportunity. Because once you come against good enough defenses, then that can actually be used against you. And I do think what I saw for the majority of this week was a lot better in that respect from Christo Popov. I feel like now he can move really fast and then hit drop shots. So he's definitely been, I don't know what he's been training on, but I would guess that he's been working on attack variety from moving from an intense or explosive manner, because it's very easy to kind of play a drop shot or a slice when you're moving that little bit slower. But when you move really explosively, like you're jumping up, then being able to hit with a little bit of variety and that kind of patience, that's much more difficult. And I did see him doing that a lot more. Like I said, I think he's always been good, but I think he's always been really fast, but he's relied on his speed and his intensity. And now he's started to develop far more than that, which I think is going to have two things. One, it's going to make his attack more dangerous, but two, it's going to make him not have to work so hard. Because again, you can chalk this up to being young and exuberant, but a lot of times when I've seen him come against more experienced players in some big matches. I've seen him when he's almost beaten Victor Axelsen or when he played Anthony Ginting at the All England semis. Starts off really, really fast and it's working, but then once that good player can kind of take the edge off of Christo, so either he drops his speed a little bit, or they're able to get used to his attack, then once he gets tired, there really isn't much else, because once he can't lay out the big smashes, it's kind of game over. So I think by adding more layers to his attack allows him to kind of be more efficient, so he can he doesn't always have to go out 100% speed like all the time. He can kind of pace himself in a way, but also it just applies more pressure to the opponent, allows them to not get so settled in their defense. And I think another thing that's allowed him to be a little bit more efficient, and it's something I have mentioned before, is that his footwork has definitely continued to smoothen out, because he's always been someone that has had quite a large split step, but now we're starting to see that split step got a lot less. So I think that's where his defensive skills have got a little better, because he's just a little bit smoother around the court. And I'm sure as he's still got a few more years before he's going to reach his physical peak, so that's only going to get better. So yeah, no, he showed all of this. I think one other thing I put here, and I felt he showed all of this all the way up to the final, and he did show it in the final, but like I said, I'll talk to that specifically, is that he showed great maturity. We must bear in mind that he was playing at his home tournament. There's going to be a lot of expectations, might be the wrong word, but he's going to put a lot of expectation on himself. He wants to do really well in front of his home crowd, and that can sometimes it's then very hard in those situations to play calmly, to play maturely, to not get super nervous or tense or uptight, or to go all out, or to be a little bit too exuberant. Basically whatever your kind of natural style is, ramp it up a few levels when you're playing on home soil, especially when you're young, and especially it was also if you're starting to get into the latter rounds. I felt that he handled that really well. He showed that really well in the semi-final when he was 18-11 down in the second game to Kunlevert, to come back and win it 22-20. I think that showed great maturity. Like I said, he showed all of these things throughout the tournament, and he did show it in the final, although it was a slightly different story. I think when he came up against Anders Antonsen, who'd had a very good tournament himself, a long and hard tournament for him, I think in honesty, what paid off Anders' experience, it was the experience of Anders. He's been in those kind of finals number of times before. He's been in a world final, he's been in numerous Super 1000 finals, 750 finals. He's been there and done that in comparison to Christo, and you could kind of see that that tension, that nervousness was mentioned a lot by Steen Pedersen throughout the final, and it was something that didn't quite see being as much of a factor in the earlier rounds, but it definitely came to the forefront in that final. I think if I look at Christo's quarterfinal, his opposition was also not too experienced, Chen, and he was almost able to blast him off in the semi-final. I thought it was really good because he was up against a guy that's been in an Olympic final, world final, who's been a world champion, Kunlevert. But I think Kunlevert's weakness is coming up against speedy players, and so even though Christo might have been a little bit feeling the same as he did in the final and going a little bit more gun-ho, I think it was still going to work. But against Anders, who was much more prepared for Christo's attack, then he was able to use it against him. And I also think the final was just that next step up. He definitely was feeling a little bit tense. He was hitting far too many, just like I said, that major improvement. I feel he's added more layers to his attack. It reverted a little bit in that final, but it's completely understandable because I think he was so wanting to do well. It was the final. He'd been playing so well up to that point, and I think he was thinking about what would happen if I was to win my home tournament. All those emotions, it's very hard to control, and I think maybe if he's able to get himself into a few more bigger finals, if he then, say, next year or whenever, a little bit in the future, he's able to get into another French Open final, I think he'll be able to handle the situation a lot more better. Because if you compared Anders and Christo played completely differently, but Anders played with more variation in his attack, more accuracy, and was more looking to kind of use the first few attacks to set up an easier option, whereas Christo was kind of trying to win it off one attack, and rarely at top men's singles level does that work. But yeah, no. So I think I chalked that final up to Anna's just having far more experience and just knowing how to close it out, etc., etc. There was a point where it seemed Christo was back in it, I think at like 16 all or 17-16 or something. 16, it was 16 all, but then Christo let a few cheap points go and that just gave Anders that little bit of breathing room, which he was able to close out. So yeah, but what a fantastic week for Christo Popov. He's constantly improving. I said this year he's really stepped up a level or two. He's obviously now being seeded in the Super 750 tournaments. He's inside the top 10, possibly top 8. I don't quite know, but I know he's definitely top 10. And I think that's a testament to the fact that of all the improvements that I've highlighted. So the next thing I want to talk about is the men's doubles final. And the reason for that is the title that I've given this section in my notes is top 2 men's pairs face in the final. Now I know that Kim Won-ho and Seung Jae are the world number ones. They're the world champions. And they've won God knows how many tournaments now this year. So obviously they are the top pair, of course. But obviously Fikri and Alfian aren't the world number 2s. But that's mainly because I think they've only played 6 or 7 tournaments together. So they haven't got enough ranking points. But I think the way they've been playing, that I think if they continue that way, which I can foresee happening, then I think they're going to not before too long become the second best pair in the world if they can maintain the level of consistency. In terms of since they've become a pair, the 2 pairs that are the most consistent are Kim Won-ho and Seung Jae and Fajar Alfian and Mohamed Fikri. In fact, if you want any indication of their consistency, over the last 2 weeks, the Indonesians have reached the final both times. I want to talk about this final because I thought it was quite interesting. But before I kind of get to the final itself in France, I think from their last 2 meetings, the first time they faced, I think it was in the China Open, in like the quarterfinals. The deciding factor, the Indonesians won that time. They came out incredibly fast and quick, rotating quickly, and caught the Koreans slightly off guard. They were a little bit too defensive and weren't quite prepared. When they played the next time, I felt that the Koreans were far more prepared for it. They were much more ready in certain situations, in transitional phases, in defense, in attack. And the Indonesians got caught off guard. And so what it set up quite nicely was how were the pairs going to approach this final. And it seemed in the first game that it was the Indonesians who once again were like, right, okay, so last time we were a little bit off pace. We weren't as prepared as they were, so we need to come out extra fast like we did in China, and they kind of blasted the Koreans. The Koreans were looked completely static in the first game. I was a bit like, wow, what's happening? It wasn't like the Indonesians were playing absolutely mind-blown. They were playing really good badminton, but they were helped by the fact the Koreans were static. When Seung Jae was at the net, there was a few times where Kim Won-ho would smash, and usually Seung Jae is looking to say, especially if it's his forehand, because they're a right-left combination, looking to come out and help his partner. But he was stuck at the net, and then Kim Won-ho got caught in a late corner, and they were able to get countered. Or there was a few times where Kim Won-ho's usually so good that once he gets on top of the net, he can finish it. And there's a few where he missed it from there because again, he wasn't really moving his feet or getting into the right position. He was just a little bit. They were caught kind of shuttle watching, and they were just completely off pace. And I was thinking, okay, this looks like it's going to. If it continues like this, if they don't do something, it's going to be a rather one-sided final. Second game, if you're a Korean fan, fortunately they were able to come out a little bit better, but I think they were helped. But I think the Indonesians did go off the boil a bit. I think end-wise, there was a little bit of drift here in France, but it wasn't too noticeable, so it wasn't like one end was much, much better for pairs. I just think that the Indonesians kind of switched off slightly. And the Koreans, add to that the Koreans just were a little bit more prepared. I think they gave themselves a bit of a talking to. Now, I think one factor in the first game, and I'm not 100% sure, this is a bit of a guess based on what I saw in the semi-finals, but I wasn't sure if Kim Won-ho is actually 100% fit. I think he could be suffering from an illness. Now, the reason I say that is in the semi-final, he looked very flushed in his face and actually was putting the ice pack that usually players have on their neck. He was dabbing it on his face, so I'm not sure whether he was quite warm, had fluish symptoms or whatever. After seeing that in the semi-finals, and then the way they played in the first game in the final, I thought, oh, okay, so maybe Kim Won-ho isn't feeling too good. And even in the second, that's why he was probably a little bit static, a bit off, and maybe why Seung Jae wasn't quite sure how to approach it. I wasn't quite sure. That was my thinking. And on top of that, obviously the Indonesians were exposing it. And then in the second, it looked like there was a few times where at the start, the score was a bit closer, but I still got this feeling that the Koreans were a bit static. But then there was a few times where I think Kim Won-ho really was like, no, I'm going to give it everything now. And he did slowly. They slowly started to get themselves into it. And I think, that, like I said, they were helped a bit by the fact the Indonesians just ever so slightly shut off. And then by the time you got into the third game, I think the Koreans were into it. And in all honesty, their defense was absolutely unreal. The Indonesians couldn't break through their defense at all. But what also added to that, which they weren't doing in the first, I'd probably say 2 games for the Koreans, was that not only were they very hard to get through, but then they were also blocking into the space, and then they were moving into the space. They stopped being as static. You started to see both players kind of defend and move forward. They were rotating around each other a lot better, and they were just kind of playing like the normal Kim Won-ho and Chae that we're used to. And I would also add that whilst the Koreans' defense was really good, the Indonesians' defense was also pretty solid, but the difference was the Indonesians weren't stepping into their defense or trying to use the space. They were literally just kind of like lifting it up, whereas the Koreans were far more alert, and their defense they were starting to use it to actually to do something. They could survive the attacking situations from the Indonesians, but then when they had the chance, they could block it into the space and get themselves onto the attack. Now, I think the last thing I'll say about this final, I do think the Indonesians did play pretty well. It wasn't a poor performance from them, although the scoreline in the second and third was relatively one-sided. And I think a lot of people will talk once again about the firepower, because obviously they couldn't get through the Korean defense. But I think, for me personally, the Indonesians lost because in the second they shut off ever so slightly. They kind of allowed the Koreans to find their game, and I think they could have just been a little bit more switched on in certain situations, a little bit longer in that second. They could have, I think then the Koreans might have lost that kind of belief a little bit. But it was also the defense. Like I said, the Koreans were utilizing space, whereas the Indonesians were just defending. Yeah, those are my thoughts on the final. I think, again, another thing I'll add just quickly at the end for the Indonesians is I still think it's been an incredibly positive start. They've obviously been very consistent. And I think although they weren't able to win this week or last week, I think the fact that they were able to do so well in slower conditions, when they are a pair that's known for not having the most firepower on court, I think is a testament to how good they are as a pair and the other kind of attributes they got. Excited to see more of this Indonesian pair moving forward. And I still think potentially they've still got a chance of the World Tour finals, but they'd have to do pretty much win their remaining tournaments. But again, that's obviously not the end goal. They're obviously going to be looking towards the big tournaments next year and getting themselves even higher in the rankings. And like I said, I do think if they continue this way, they will be right up beneath Kim Won-ho and Chae as world number 2s. Because, these two pairs, I think at the moment, based on recent form, they are the top 2 pairs in the world. Right, okay, so Q&A. So the first one, I already kind of touched on a bit, but I'll quickly answer it. 3 back-to-back tournaments with pretty slow playing conditions in all 3 countries. Is it a bit too much on the players, especially the top players where everyone expects them to perform and win every week? I think the conditions in all 3 tournaments were pretty slow. I think for France especially, let's keep it to that, I think it was possibly not necessarily the whole conditions. I got a feeling they started to use slower and slower shuttles as the week went on, because, like I said, in the earlier rounds, it seemed to be playing much faster. When you just watch it on TV, you can kind of see that the shuttle isn't parachuting as much. In Denmark and the Arctic Open, players would hit it and it would almost just be like a parachute going, whereas in France in the early rounds it looked much quicker, and I was like, okay, this is going to be quite exciting. But as the week progressed, I'm not sure whether they switched to a slower speed because it started to get a little bit slower and slower. But yeah, it is hard on the players. I think slow playing conditions are never really that great. We see a lot of long, drawn-out matches. It becomes obviously a physical toll. For me, there's always a sweet spot. I don't particularly like watching really fast conditions. I don't mind windy or tricky conditions because that can be quite interesting to see how the players approach that and how they kind of can apply themselves, how they can apply their technical skills, their physical skills, their tactical skills. But I think I always like it when it's like a good speed but not crazy fast or crazy slow, because then you kind of get the best of both worlds. I want to see some long rallies, and I want to see some, actual getting into rallies, especially for the doubles events, the men's doubles. But I don't want it where if we start seeing rallies, like I saw some 40, 50 shot rallies in men's doubles where they're clearing and doing that kind of stuff, then that's no good to watch anywhere. So yeah, no, it is really, really tough on the players. And I think I've heard this conversation, like I said, about the shuttle speed. I remember when Anders and Vittingus used to speak about it, that they just need to use fast shuttles. If the conditions are slow, have a faster shuttle, and I think that's a solution. But yeah, no, yeah, it is very hard on the players. Do you think Igarashi and Shida should continue to stay together? Well, yes, I do think they should. I know a lot of people were I think even someone commented under this question saying that Arisa should go back to mixed doubles. I can kind of see why, because obviously she had so much success with Yuta Watanabe there, and obviously in the women's doubles she's had some success, but obviously not. She's been playing women's doubles for like a year now, and it's not like in mind-blowing results. Not that we should expect those, but I think it's natural for people to think that she should go back to mixed doubles, especially as Japan could probably do with Yuta and Arisa in the mixed doubles. But in terms of this pair, I think obviously they're still figuring things out. It was a big change. Obviously, I've already mentioned Arisa's moving over from mixed doubles, but also she's moving on from another partner, Sakamoto, who she played with earlier in this year. And her and Shida are completely different players, not just right and left-handed, but the way they played. So they've got to kind of get used to that. And obviously Shida's coming out of a long partnership with Nami Matsuyama, and she's completely different to Arisa. So obviously they've got to kind of readjust and recalibrate to each other, get used to what works, what doesn't, how you set each play up, who's going to take what in what situation, that mutual understanding, that unspoken understanding that when you watch top pairs, they have this they can almost telepathically know, and that's something that some pairs have it straight off the bat, but some pairs requires more time. And I think, when I spoke of Shida and Igarashi after their first tournament together, that's where they needed to improve, and I still think they need more time to figure it out. So yeah, no, I think watching them play, I've kept an eye on a few of their matches. I think it is slowly starting to click. I'm starting to see, I think I saw Shida starting to kind of calm down in certain situations. I felt that she was always charging in, like she used to work well with Matsuyama, but now she's being a bit more methodical. So again, like I said, it's just going to take a little bit more time. And I think lastly, it's a bit like someone asked me about this about Alfian and Fikri. I'm unsure of other potential options in the Japanese women doubles, but then again, I'm not hot on who other Japanese pairs are, but most of them seem set in stone now. But again, if any of you out there know of potential partners for either Arisa or Shida in the women's doubles, then I'm all ears. But yeah, no, do I think they should stay together? Yeah, I think they should definitely be given a little bit more time. Okay, last question. Is Seung versus Chen Yufei semis the most exciting women's singles match this year? Well, in all honesty, I'm not quite sure. I can't think of another match. I quite enjoyed the absolute slugfest of the All England final with Seung versus Wang Ziyi. But then again, this match in France was also a bit of a slugfest. And also another comparison I'd say is I don't think Seung was in the best of form. If I remember rightly, I think she was a little bit under the weather, or so reports of that at that All England final. And I think in this French semi, both these players don't think they were absolutely at their best. They've definitely had better matches in the past. But as far as this year goes, I'm not quite sure. I think in regards to this match, I think Seung wasn't quite at her best because I think a little bit of fatigue, from the week before, the big effort she had to put in to win in Denmark, and then obviously even in France, the round before, she had to put in a lot of effort against Gao Fangji. I'd also say, personally, I think the match probably should have ended in 2 games. Seung was leading 17-14 in the second and looked to be in control. And I got the feeling that Chen Yufei was kind of playing quite passively, not really believing that she could win. I didn't get that impression. But then when Seung did let her in, I started to see Chen Yufei attack a little bit more and start to create a few more chances, which I think did spill over a little bit into the deciding game. I think we started to see a bit more there. But overall, for the first 2 games, and even overall, I don't think it was an incredibly exciting match. Obviously, it was a long match. There was some really good rallies. There was some brutal stuff, but I've seen these two play much better. In terms of the most exciting women's singles match of this year, again, I I can't quite think of many off the top of my head. Maybe people in the comments can kind of answer this question, but what I want to say is it was a brutal match. It was a long match, but I don't think it was both players playing at their best. I think these two will have if they're able to play each other maybe at the World Tour finals. I'm not quite sure if that's possible. I would assume so. I think both players should be in a position to qualify. I think they're going to have much better matches in the future. Yeah, I think I'll turn that question over to my viewers because I can't think of any match off the top of my head. But yeah, I'll stick with what I'm saying is I don't think this was the best match I've seen from both these players, and I don't think either player was playing at their absolute best. I think it was, maybe people see it as exciting because it was long and there were some brutally hard rallies, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. So yeah, I think I'll end the video on that question, turning it over to you guys. Thanks as always for watching. As always, if you've got any comments you want to add, things you want to, like, kind of things you disagree with me, things you agree, additional context, all the usual stuff, then obviously get in the comment section below. You know, I try to kind of comment back and kind of communicate with you guys there, trying to interact with as much as I can. So yeah, no, I hope you enjoyed the video. Next week is the last one of this really long tour. It's the Hyde Open because it's been upgraded from a 300 to a 500. So I will be doing a Beckman's breakdown on it. I'll be honest, I am looking forward to that one being over because I do enjoy watching badminton, but the badminton fatigue is real. And I think not just the players, but I think the fans need a break from badminton. So it'd be nice for me to be able to kind of do something a bit different and create some other content, which I'll update you all in the next video. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.